The sky over Tesavaru bent inward at the third bell, and every soul on the temple terraces stopped breathing at once. Sael of the Star Tenders had seen the bending 11 times in his 19 years, and it had frightened him each time, but tonight it was wrong. The bending was supposed to come from above, from the place where the Veshtaru lived, where the gods who could not be challenged folded the air like cloth and looked down at the world they owned. That was the law of the sky. The gods bent space, and space obeyed, and the people watched and gave thanks that they had been spared. But tonight, the bend came from the wrong direction. It came from low on the eastern rim, from the dark band of stars that the priests called the Shut Gate, the part of heaven the Veshtaru had sealed long ago and forbidden anyone to name. The bend pulled the light of those forbidden stars into a tight, bright knot, and the knot grew, and Sael felt the stone terrace shiver under his bare feet. "That is not them," said old martial priest Olun beside him, very softly, so that only Sael could hear. Olun had served the temple for 200 years. His voice did not shake easily. It was shaking now. "Boy, mark the hour. Mark it exactly. Something is coming through the shut gate." Sael lifted his counting slate with hands that would not stay still, and pressed the bright dot of the third bell into the soft clay. He was a chronicler. That was his whole purpose. The Star Tenders kept the record of the gods so that the people would always know how small they were and how merciful the Veshtaru had been not to unmake them. Sael had been trained since he could walk to watch the sky and write down what the gods did. He had never once written down something the gods did not do. The knot of light in the east tore open. It did not flash, it did not roar. It simply parted, the way a curtain parts when a hand pushes through it from behind, and out of the part came a shape, and the shape was a ship. Sael had no word for the size of it. The Star Tenders had words for the sizes of Veshtaru vessels, words that meant mountain, and meant moon, and meant the thing larger than a moon that no one was allowed to describe twice. This was not those sizes. This was its own size. It was long and gray and flat-prowed, and it was scarred down one whole flank with marks that Sael's eyes read as wounds. Old wounds, healed wounds. The kind a creature carries when it has been hurt many times and has lived through all of them. There was writing on its side in a script Sael could not read, and below the writing a single long row of dark hatches that he understood, with a cold drop in his belly, were doors. Doors that opened. Doors meant for things to come out. Across the prow, where a Veshtaru ship would have carried the burning eye of a god, this ship carried instead a single painted shape, a lantern, a plain old hand lantern, the kind a watchman carried on a wall, glowing yellow against the gray. "What god is that?" Sael whispered. "Which one? Tell me which one, martial priest." "None of them," said Olun. "None of ours." Sael had been taught the names of every kind of light in the sky. He knew the cold white of the fixed stars, and the slow red of the wanderers, and the sick green of a bending in progress, and the no color of the gods themselves. He had no name for the yellow of that painted lantern. It was a warm color, a low color, a color that did not belong in heaven at all. It was the color of a lamp in a window, of a fire in a hearth, of the small flames the poorest pilgrims carried up the temple road at night. It was the most ordinary color in the world, and it was hanging 2,000 spans up on the prow of a thing that had come through a sealed sky, and Sael could not stop looking at it, because in a heaven that had only ever shown him colors that frightened him, here at last was one that did not. Here at last was a light that looked like it had been lit by a hand, for a person, to see by. The ship slid forward into the high air over the temple city, and it slowed, and it stopped, and it hung there, 2,000 spans up, exactly above the great plaza where 40,000 pilgrims had gathered for the bending feast. It did not bend the air around it. That was the thing Sael could not stop staring at. The Veshtaru could not move without bending space, without pulling the world out of true self, so that the eye ached to look at them. This gray ship moved through the sky like an honest thing, like a stone thrown by a strong arm, and the air closed cleanly behind it, and nothing ached at all. For the length of 9 slow breaths, nothing happened, and the not happening was the most frightening thing of all. Sael had been raised on the certainty that the sky was busy, that the gods were always working, bending and folding and pulling, that the heavens were a place of ceaseless holy labor that no one was meant to look at directly. A still sky was an impossible sky, and yet the gray ship hung there and was still, and the air around it was still, and Sail realized he had been waiting his whole life without knowing it, for the sky to simply hold still long enough for him to look at it. He looked. His eyes did not ache. He had not known, until that moment, that the ache had been a thing done to him on purpose, and not a property of heaven itself. Beside him, Martial Priest Olun had begun, very quietly, to weep. Sael did not understand it then. He understood it later. The old priest had spent 200 years looking at a sky that hurt to look at, and had been taught that the hurt was holiness, and now in his last years he was being shown, without warning, that the hurt had been a leash all along, and that a sky could simply be looked at, and that he had given his whole life to a pain that did not have to exist. A voice came down from the ship. It spoke in the high tongue of the temple, the dead priestly tongue that only the star-tenders still learned, and it spoke it badly, with hard flat edges, as if the speaker had learned it from a book and never heard it sung. But it was understandable. Every soul in the plaza understood it. That alone was a wonder, because the Veshtaru never spoke to the people. The gods did not explain. The gods bent the sky, and the people guessed at meaning, and the priests invented the rest. People of the world you call Tessavaru, the voice said. This vessel is the Terran Battleship Steadfast Aurora. We have come a long way to reach you, and we have come uninvited, and we ask your pardon for the fear we are causing. We will try to be quick. Sail's stylus had stopped moving. He realized it and forced it down and began, frantically, to write. You have masters, the voice went on. You call them gods. We have another name for them, and we have been looking for them for a very long time. We believe they are coming back to this sky soon, perhaps within your next 2 days, to perform the thing you call the bending feast. We would like to be here when they arrive. We will wait. We will not harm your city. You may watch. The voice paused. When it came again, it was, somehow, gentler, though the words were not soft. One more thing, and then we will be quiet. The bending in your sky is not holy. It is not the act of gods. It is the wake of an engine, the same as the wake a boat leaves on water, and the engine belongs to creatures, and creatures can be answered. We do not ask you to believe this. We ask only that you watch, and write down what you see, exactly as it happens. Someone among you keeps the record. Let them keep it true. The voice stopped. The gray ship hung in the air, and did nothing, said nothing, asked nothing more. In the plaza below, 40,000 pilgrims made the sign against unmaking, the crossed wrist sign that the temple taught every child, and a low wail of terror went up from them, because they had been told all their lives that to hear the word answered spoken of the gods was itself a death sentence, that the Veshtaru would sense the blasphemy across the whole reach of the sky, and come and erase the world for it. But Sael, high on the terrace, was not making the sign. Sael was writing. Someone among you keeps the record. Let them keep it true. The voice had spoken to him, not to the priests, not to the marshals, not to the gods, to the boy with the slate. He did not know how the gray ship knew he was there. He only knew that for the first time in his life, the sky had asked him to tell the truth, and he found that he wanted to. He wrote faster than he had ever written. He wrote the word answered, and beside it the word ship, and beside that the painted lantern, drawing the little shape of it into the clay with 3 quick strokes. He wrote the size that was its own size, and would not be compared to mountains or moons. He wrote that the air closed cleanly behind it, and that nothing ached. He wrote that the voice had asked the people to watch, and that this alone broke a law older than the temple, because the gods never asked, the gods only took. Each thing he pressed into the clay felt less like recording and more like building, as if every true mark made the night a little more solid, a little harder to fold away, a little more real. That was the thing the temple had never taught him, the thing he was only now beginning to feel in his hands. A true record is not a description of a thing that happened. A true record is a weight. It is a stone you set down on the side of the scale that says this was real, and once enough stones are set down, the scale will not tip back, no matter how hard the sky leans on it. He did not have these words yet. He only had the feeling, in his shaking hands, that the clay under his stylus mattered more than anything he had ever touched. Erase it, Martial Priest Olun said suddenly. Sael looked up. What? Erase the record. Erase the hour. Erase the name of the ship. Olun's old face had gone the gray of ash. His eyes were fixed on the eastern sky, on the shut gate, where the knot of light had closed behind the gray ship like a healing wound. If the Veshtaru come and find that we wrote down the word the ship said, they will not punish the ship. They cannot reach the ship, it is plain they cannot. Look at it. It sits in our air, and they have not come. They will punish us. They will punish the city. They will unmake the record keepers first. Boy, they always take the record keepers first, because the gods do not want a true record to exist. Erase it. I am ordering you, erase it now. Sael looked down at the slate. He looked at the bright dot of the third bell, and the careful marks beside it, and the word he had pressed into the clay in the high tongue, the word the gray ship had used. Answered. He did not erase it. Martial priest, he said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. You taught me that the star tenders exist to keep the record true. You taught me that the first and only sin of a chronicler is to write a thing that did not happen, or to unwrite a thing that did. The ship spoke. I heard it. You heard it. 40,000 people heard it. If I erase it, then I am the liar, and not the gods. Olun stared at him. I will not erase it, Sael said. If the gods come and unmake me for keeping the record true, then let them, but the record will be true when they do. For a long moment, the old priest said nothing. The gray ship hung above the plaza. The pilgrims wailed. Somewhere in the temple, the great alarm drums began to beat, summoning the choir wardens, the soldier priests who served as the eyes of the Veshtaru on the ground, the ones whose duty was to report blasphemy to the sky. And then Olun did a thing Sael would remember for the rest of his life, however long or short that turned out to be. The old priest reached out and put one hand flat on the boy's counting slate, not to take it, not to wipe it, but to steady it, the way you steady a thing you have decided to protect. Then keep it true, Olun said, and keep it close, and when they come for you, boy, run, and take it with you, because someone is going to have to carry the true record out of this city before the night is over. It might as well be the one who refused to lie. Below them, in the dark mouth of the temple stair, the first of the choir wardens appeared, tall and armored, and crowned with the burning circlet of their office, and they were looking up at the terrace, and they were looking at the boy with the slate, and they began, without hurry, to climb. High above, the steadfast aurora burned its single yellow lantern against the gray of its hull, and waited, exactly as it had said it would, for the gods to come home. The choir wardens climbed 9 flights of temple stair, and Sael counted every one, because counting was the only thing that kept his hands from shaking the slate to pieces. There were 6 of them. He could see the burning circlets bobbing up through the dark of the stairwell, 6 small rings of cold blue fire, and he knew what each circlet meant. A choir warden was a person who had given up their own voice to the Veshtaru, who had let the gods reach down and take the part of them that spoke, so that whatever they said afterward was not their own. They were the ground mouths of the sky. When a choir warden spoke, the gods spoke, and the gods, climbing the stair, wanted the boy with the slate. There is a back way, Olun said, low and fast. Behind the bell frame, it drops to the cistern level. From the cistern you can reach the Pilgrim Road, and from the Pilgrim Road you can be out of the city before second moonrise. Go now, while they are still on the stair. Come with me, Sael said. No. The old priest almost smiled. I am 200 years old, and I cannot run 9 flights, never mind a city. And someone must stand here and waste their time. I am very good at wasting the time of important people. It is most of what a martial priest does. He pressed something into Sael's free hand. It was his own seal ring, the heavy iron ring of his office, the one that opened every locked door in the temple. Take it. The cistern gate is sealed. This opens it. Go. Sael's throat closed. Martial priest. You will not lie about what the sky said tonight, Olun said. And I will not lie about where you went. That is 2 of us keeping the record true. It is enough. Run, boy. Sael ran. For 1 heartbeat he did not. For 1 heartbeat he stood frozen behind the silent bells, and looked back at the old priest standing alone at the rail, small and bent and unarmed, waiting to waste the time of gods with the story of a cramped hand, and Sael felt the whole weight of what was being asked of him. Olun was going to stay and be taken so that the record could leave. The oldest keeper of the record in the world was going to give his life so that the youngest could carry the truth out the back. It was the most that one chronicler had ever asked of another, and it was being asked of a boy who, an hour ago, had never written down a single thing the gods did not do. Then he ran, because the only way to make the old priest's sacrifice into a lie was to stay and be taken with him, and the only way to make it true was to live and carry the slate. Sael chose to make it true. He would spend the rest of his life choosing to make things true. It started here, behind the bells, with a boy choosing to run instead of to die, not because he was afraid, but because the record needed legs. He went behind the bell frame, where the great bronze bells hung silent on their black beams, and found the narrow, dark gap in the wall that he had never once noticed in 19 years of climbing these stairs, and he squeezed into it, and he dropped. The shaft was steep and slick, and he half fell, half slid, the counting slate clutched against his chest with both arms, the iron ring biting into his palm. Above him, far away now, he heard the choir wardens reach the terrace. He heard them speak. Their voice was flat and many at once, 6 mouths shaping one word, and the word was the boy's name. Sael of the Star Tenders, you have made a false record. Surrender it. And he heard Olun answer, calm and grand and slow, the way the old priest answered everything, stretching each word, wasting their time. A false record. Why? Wardens, I have made no record at all tonight. I am too old to write. My hand cramps. Let me show you how it cramps. It is a long story. It begins with my 3rd apprenticeship, under the late lamented Martial Priest Devu, who had a similar complaint of the hand, though in his case it was the left. Sael could not hear the rest. He was already at the bottom of the shaft, in the wet dark of the cistern level, and he was running again, and he was weeping as he ran. But he did not stop, because the old priest had asked him for exactly one thing, and it was not to weep. He landed hard at the bottom and lay still for a moment in the wet dark, listening to his own heart, and to the temple far above. The alarm drums had spread. He could hear other drums now, in other quarters of the city, the wardens of the lower temples taking up the call, the whole holy machine of Tesavaru turning its attention toward one terrace and one boy. He had never in his life been the thing a city looked for. The star tenders were meant to be invisible, the quiet hands that kept the record, never the subject of it. To be hunted was to be, in a sense, recorded, and Sael felt the strangeness of it even through his terror. He had become a thing that happened. He hoped someone else was writing it down truly, because he was too busy running to do it himself. The cistern level was a world of black water and old pillars. Sael knew it only from stories. The temple drew its water from a lake that lay under the whole hill, a still cold lake that the priest said had been there before the gods, before the bending, before the first bending feast. He moved along the narrow stone walk at the water's edge, his bare feet silent, and he held the slate up out of the wet, and he tried to think. The gray ship had spoken to the chronicler. Keep the record true. Run and take it with you. The ship had known he would have to run. The ship had known about the choir wardens. The ship, hanging in the sky, somehow understood the shape of the trap better than Sael did, and Sael had lived in this temple his whole life. How? How did a thing that came through the shut gate, a thing none of the gods had ever named, know more about the gods than the priests who served them? He reached the cistern gate. It was iron, old, locked with a great iron tumbler, and he fitted Olun's ring into the lock and turned it, and it opened, and the pilgrim road lay beyond, dark and empty, and curving down the hill toward the city wall. And on the road, waiting, stood a choir warden. Not climbing the stair, here, below. The gods had thought of the back way too. Of course they had. The circlet burned cold and blue, and the warden turned its blind helmed face toward him, and it spoke with the flat layered voice. Sael of the Star Tenders, the record you carry is false. The sky did not speak. No ship hangs above the plaza. You have been deceived by a sickness of the eye, a common thing in young chroniclers who fast too long before the feast. Give me the slate. I will correct it. Then you will go home, and you will sleep, and in the morning you will remember nothing, and you will be well. Sael stood very still. He looked at the warden. He looked, past the warden, Up through the great cistern vent in the hillside, a wide round shaft cut to let air down to the lake, and through it, he could see a patch of sky, and in the patch of sky, plain and gray and real, hung the steadfast aurora, its yellow lantern burning, exactly where it had been. "There is a ship," Sael said. "I can see it now, through the vent, behind you." "There is no ship," said the warden. "You took their voices," Sael said, and he did not know where the words were coming from, only that they were true, and that he had to say them. "You took the voices of 6 people and gave them to the gods, and the gods are using those voices to tell me my own eyes are sick. But my eyes are not sick. I am looking at the ship. It is gray. It has a lantern painted on the front. It told me to keep the record true. So I am going to keep it true, and I am going to say to your face that there is a ship in the sky, and you cannot make there not be one by speaking with a borrowed mouth." The warden took a step toward him. The cold blue fire of the circlet flared. And then the lake moved. Sael felt it before he understood it. A pressure in the air, a change in the cold, the still black water of the under-temple lake rising into a shape it should not have been able to make. He threw himself flat on the stone walk. Something passed over him, fast and silent, and struck the choir warden, and the blue fire of the circlet went out, all at once, like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. The warden fell. It did not cry out. It had no voice of its own to cry with. In the dark, a new voice spoke. It was a small voice, an ordinary voice, a voice that belonged to a single person and not to 6, and it spoke the high tongue cleanly, the way Olun spoke it, the way it was meant to be sung. "Startender, don't run yet. I'm a friend. I came down to find you." Sael lifted his head. A figure stood at the water's edge, dripping, slight, wrapped in a dark, close-fitting suit that the lake water beaded off without soaking in. It was not Veshtaru. It was not a choir warden. It was something new, something Sael had no shelf for in his whole catalog of the world. It was shaped a little like a person, and a little like nothing. 2 arms, 2 legs, a round pale face under a clear hood, and behind the hood, a pair of eyes that were watching him with an expression he slowly recognized, with great surprise, as kindness. For a long moment, Sael could not speak at all. Everything he had been taught said that the only things that came from the sky were gods, and that to stand near a thing from the sky was to be unmade. Yet here was a thing from the sky, dripping lake water, kneeling over a fallen warden to wake it instead of to erase it, and the only feeling Sael could find in himself was not the holy terror the temple had promised. It was curiosity. It was the chronicler's hunger, the one that had gotten him into trouble since he was small, the need to know what a thing was and to write it down truly. He found that he was already composing the line in his head. A creature came up out of the under-temple lake. It was not a god. It woke the warden, instead of erasing it. "You came from the ship," Sael said. "I came from the ship," the figure agreed. "My name is Mira Adair. I'm what we call a contact officer. My job is to find the one person on a world who's keeping an honest record, and make sure they live long enough to finish it." She glanced down at the fallen warden, and something crossed her face, something tired and old. "I'm sorry about that one. We tried to do it without hurting anybody. It doesn't always work." "You killed it," Sael said. "No." Mira knelt by the warden, did something quick at the side of its helm, and the figure on the ground stirred, breathed, made a low, confused sound, a human sound, a person's sound. I unlocked it. "The circlet's a leash. I cut the leash. He's going to wake up in a minute, with his own voice back in his head for the first time in years, and he's going to be very frightened, and very angry, and then I hope someday very glad. That's 6 people the gods were wearing like gloves. There are 900 more circlets in this city. We can't cut all of them tonight, but we cut these 6, because these 6 were sent to take you." Sael stared at the waking warden, at the slack, frightened face under the dark helm, at the cold, dead ring that had burned blue a moment ago. A person. It had been a person the whole time. "Why me?" he whispered. "Why does the ship care about one chronicler? Why come all this way through the shut gate? Why hang in our sky and wait for the gods? Why send you down into a cold lake, all for one boy with a slate?" Mira Adair stood. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she answered, and her answer was not what he expected at all. Because the gods you serve aren't gods, she said, and they aren't even the worst thing in this sky. They're a tool. A long time ago, something that catalogs worlds, something we've fought across 40 systems and 1100 years, found this region of space, and decided your world was worth keeping. Not worth saving, worth keeping. The way you'd keep a beetle in a jar. And it built your Veshtaru to be the lid of the jar. It taught them to bend space so the people would worship instead of question. It put circlets on your bravest, and made them informers. And it left one rule, one single rule, carved into the whole machine of your faith. She paused. No true record may exist. Because a true record is the one thing a jar cannot survive. A beetle that writes down the shape of its jar is no longer fully inside it. Sael looked down at the slate in his arms, the bright dot of the third bell, the careful marks. The word, answered. Sael's mind reeled. He had been raised inside one story his entire life, the story of the merciful gods who could have unmade the world, and chose instead to bend its sky and be worshipped. And now in the cold dark of the cistern, that story was being lifted off him like a heavy wet cloak, and underneath it was a colder, worse, truer story. The Veshtaru were not the top of the world. They were the lid of a jar, and above them, somewhere out past the shut gate, was the hand that had built the jar and set the lid, a thing that did not bend space at all, but did something quieter and more patient, a thing that found worlds and decided whether they were worth keeping, and kept them. The thing above the gods, he said slowly, the one that catalogs. Does it have a name? We call it the tally, Mira said, and her voice went carefully flat, the way a person's voice goes when they are naming something they have lost people to, because that's all it does in the end. It finds a living world and it counts it. Counts the people, counts the cities, counts the songs. Files the whole world away in some vast cold record of its own, and then it builds a lid to keep the world exactly as it was on the day it was counted. Nothing new allowed. Nothing remembered that the tally didn't write down first. Your gods are the lid it built for this world. The bending, the worship, the forgetting, the rule against a true record. All of it is the tally keeping you exactly as you were, the day it found you, 2,000 years ago, like a flower pressed flat in a book. She looked at him. We have been at war with the tally for 1100 years. We have never found it. We have never even seen it. We only ever find its lids, world after world, and we take the lids off, one at a time, and we let the worlds underneath start growing again. That's the whole war, Startender. The tally presses worlds flat, and we, very slowly, world by world, teach them to stand back up. And you came, he said slowly, for the record. We came for the record, Mira said. We have been coming for the record, world after world, for 1100 years. We can't free a world by force. We tried, early on. It doesn't take. You free a world by finding the one person inside it who already refused to lie, and you stand behind them while they finish the sentence. The rest, the people do themselves. She held out one gloved hand, not to take the slate, only offered. Open. You already refused, Startender. Up on the terrace. Before I ever reached you, you wrote the word the gods forbid, and you would not erase it. That's why the ship spoke to you, and not to the priests. The Aurora doesn't pick the bravest, or the strongest, or the highest born. It picks the one who was already keeping it true when no one was watching. Tonight that was you. Far above them, muffled by stone and water and the long climb of the cistern vent, the great alarm drums of the temple changed their beat. Sael knew that rhythm. Every child knew that rhythm. It was the coming beat, the one the drums played only at the bending feast, the one that meant the sky was opening, that meant the gods were near. Mira heard it too. She tilted her head, listening, and her face changed. That's early, she said quietly, almost to herself. They're a day early. They felt us. Of course they felt us. She looked back at Sael, and now there was no time in her voice, only speed. Startender, listen to me. The gods are coming back to your sky right now, tonight. Because a thing they cannot name is sitting in their air, and they cannot ignore it any longer. When they come, they are going to do everything they can to make the people believe that the gray ship was never here. They are going to bend the sky harder than you have ever seen it bent. They are going to break the daylight and twist the stars and make the very ground forget its own shape. And the only thing in this whole world that can stand against that, the only weight on the other side of the scale, is a true record kept by a person who will not be talked out of what they saw. "That's me," Sael said. It was not a question. It was the most frightened he had ever been, and it was, somehow, also the first time in his life that he had felt entirely sure of what he was for. "That's you," said Mira Adair. "So here is what is going to happen. You and I are going to climb back up through this hill. We are going to go out onto the high terrace, in front of the whole city, where 40,000 people can see you. And when the gods come down out of the shut gate to unmake the truth, you are going to stand there with your slate, and you are going to read aloud, in the high tongue, every single thing you wrote. The hour, the ship, the lantern, the word. And the ship above us is going to make very sure that you are heard." "They will unmake me," Sael whispered. "They will try," Mira said. "And the steadfast Aurora is going to be standing in the sky between you and them. And the steadfast Aurora has been hit by worse than gods, on worlds older than this one, and it has never once gone down. It has a name for what it does. The crew calls it holding the lantern. One ship, in the dark, holding a light up high enough that the people underneath can see by it long enough to stop being afraid. That is the whole of the human war, Startender. That is the only weapon we have ever really had. We hold the lantern, and we do not let it go out, no matter what comes down out of the sky to put it out." Above them, the coming beat thundered, and the cold water of the ancient lake began, very faintly, to tremble, as the sky over Tessavaru started once again to bend. Sael of the Startenders looked at the strange kind creature from the gray ship, and he looked at the slate in his arms, and he thought of Marshal Priest Olun upstairs, wasting the time of gods with a story about a cramped hand, and he found that his own hands had finally, completely, stopped shaking. "Then take me up," he said, "and let them hear me read." The climb back up through the hill took them past the freed warden, who had woken fully now, and sat against the cistern wall with his helm off, and his own face bare to the air, weeping the way a person weeps, who has been buried alive for years, and has just been dug out. Mira stopped only long enough to set a hand on his shoulder, and tell him to wait, to stay below, that the surface was no place for him tonight. He nodded without understanding, the way the newly freed always nodded, and Sael, climbing past, thought that he would remember that face for the rest of his life, the first face he had ever seen wake up out of the gods. They came up out of the hill, into a world that had stopped making sense. Sael had expected the high terrace to look as it always looked, the long stone shelf, the silent bells, the plaza far below. Instead, the air itself had gone wrong. The eastern sky, the shut gate, had peeled open from rim to crown, and through the opening poured a light that was not a color, a light that the eye refused to keep, so that Sael's gaze kept sliding off it, the way a foot slides off wet glass. The stars near the opening were moving, not twinkling, moving, sliding across the black in long, slow arcs, dragged out of their fixed places by something climbing up behind them, the way leaves are dragged across a pond by a thing swimming underneath. The Veshtaru were coming. "Don't look straight at the bend," Mira said, close at his shoulder. She had a small flat device in one hand, and she was watching it more than the sky. "It's built to hurt. That's the whole point of it. They learned a long time ago that a person who can't bear to look at a thing will agree to almost anything to be told they don't have to. Keep your eyes on the ship, on the lantern. That's why it's painted there, something to hold on to." Sael fixed his eyes on the steadfast Aurora. The gray battleship had moved. While he was below in the cistern, it had risen and turned and slid eastward, and now it hung directly between the temple city and the opening shut gate, square across the path of the gods, its scarred flank toward the people, and its lantern prow toward the bend. It looked very small against that opening. It looked like a single gray stone set down in the doorway of a storm, and it was not moving. It hung there, steady, while the whole sky around it heaved and slid and refused to keep still, and the steadiness of it was the most defiant thing Sael had ever seen. Everything in the heavens was bending. The gray ship was not. The gray ship had simply decided not to. The first god came through. Sael's training had given him words for the sizes of the Veshtaru, and tonight he learned that the words were lies the priests had told to make the thing bearable. The first god was not the size of a mountain. It was a wound in the air the length of a city, a long, pale, curving body that did not have edges so much as suggestions of edges, and where it passed, the stars behind it stopped existing and then started again, as if reality were a cloth and the god were a needle pulling a thread through it. It did not have a shape Sael could hold in his mind. Every time he thought he saw its shape, the shape changed, and he understood, with a cold lurch, that this was on purpose, that a thing you cannot picture is a thing you cannot describe, and a thing you cannot describe is a thing you cannot record. He looked down at his slate, he pressed his stylus to the clay, and he wrote, in plain, steady marks. At the coming beat, the first Veshtaru came through the open-shut gate. It was long and pale. I could not hold its shape. That is the truth. I could not hold its shape. And the writing of it, the simple, honest admission of what he could not do, somehow made the god smaller. Not in the sky, in his chest. He had named the trick. A thing whose only weapon is that you cannot describe it, loses half its weapon the moment you write down I cannot describe it. Because now there is a record, and the record is true, and the truth has a shape, even when the god does not. Good, Mira breathed, watching him. That's it. That's exactly it. Write what you can't do as well as what you can. Keep going. Mira's flat device chimed, and she read it, and her jaw tightened. The ship's counting them as they come through, she said. It reads the wake each one leaves. The keel can feel them bending space the way you'd feel a hand pressing on the other side of a wall. She glanced up at the gray ship hanging in the doorway of the storm. Aurora makes it 5. It's telling us 5 came down the night it found the last world too. They always come in 5s. 5 is how many it takes to hold a sky. She looked at Sail, which means the ship knows exactly how many it has to answer. It always knows the count before the fight starts. That's the first thing humans do, on every world, before anything else. We count. We count the thing that says it cannot be counted. It hates that more than it hates the lances. A thing that has been counted is a thing that can be finished, and it knows it. More came through. A second god, a third, a fourth, until 5 of the long, pale, impossible bodies hung in the open sky, and the whole eastern heaven was a churn of dragged stars and sliding light. And then they noticed the gray ship in the doorway, and the bending changed. Sael felt it as a pressure on the inside of his skull, a vast patient pushing, as if a hand the size of the sky had laid itself flat against the world and begun, gently, to press. The stone of the terrace groaned. The silent bells on their black beams swung without wind, and rang one low, confused note. Down in the plaza, the 40,000 pilgrims cried out as one, and Sael saw, even from up here, that some of them were beginning to forget. He could see it happen. He could see a whole section of the crowd turn their faces up to the gray ship, and then frown, and rub their eyes, and look at the empty air where the ship was, as if it had never been there. The bending was reaching into them, and smoothing the memory flat, erasing the record from the only place a record finally lives, which is the inside of a witness. Sael felt it reach for him too, and this time he was ready for it, and being ready made it worse, because he could feel exactly what it was doing. It was not erasing the ship from his eyes. He could still see the ship. It was erasing his certainty that the ship mattered. It whispered, in the wordless way the bending whispered, that the gray thing in the sky was nothing, a curiosity, a trick of the light, not worth the risk of remembering, certainly not worth dying for. Go home, the bending said, without words. Sleep. The gods will sort it out. They always have. Who are you to keep a record against the sky? You are a boy with a slate. Set it down. Rest. And Sael understood, gripping the slate until his knuckles ached, that this was the true face of the thing that had owned his world. Not terror, but comfort. Not the threat of unmaking, but the sweet, exhausted permission to stop caring. It had ruled for 2,000 years, not by frightening people into silence, but by tiring them into it. They're taking it, Sael said, horrified. The ship. They're making the people forget the ship is even there. Yes, Mira said grimly. That's their oldest move. Don't fight the witness, edit the witness. We've seen it on 40 worlds. She keyed something on her device. Aurora. They're doing the smoothing. Light the prow. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the steadfast Aurora turned on its lantern. Not the painted one, the real one. Along the whole gray length of the battleship, every dark hatch and port and seam blazed open with a hard, clean yellow light, and the painted lantern on the prow flared up brightest of all. A true beacon now, throwing a shaft of plain, honest yellow light down across the heaving sky, and onto the plaza, and onto the temple, and onto the upturned faces of 40,000 frightened people. It was not a weapon, it did not burn anything. It was only light, ordinary visible light, the kind any watchman carried on any wall. But it fell on the crowd, and where it fell, the forgetting stopped. Sile watched it happen. He watched a man in the plaza who had been rubbing his eyes, who had been forgetting, lift his face into the yellow light and go still, and then point straight up at the ship, and shout, and the people around him followed the line of his arm, and they saw it too. The light made the ship impossible to unsee. You cannot be talked out of a thing while it is shining on your own hands. That was the whole trick of it, Sale understood. The gods erased the record by erasing the witness's certainty, and the Aurora answered by simply, stubbornly, refusing to be dark. Here I am. Look, I am shining on you. You cannot forget a light that is touching your skin. And the gods learned, for the first time in 2,000 years, that their oldest move had a counter. Sale could feel them not understanding it. The bending pressed down on the plaza, and the yellow light pushed back up, and where the two met, along the edge of the Aurora's beam, the air seemed to argue with itself, to flicker between bent and honest, between forgetting and remembering. It was not a clash of weapons. It was a clash of two different claims about what was true. The gods claimed there was no ship, the light claimed there was, and the people, caught in the middle, were the ground the two armies fought over, and Sael watched them choose, one by one, the side that was shining on their own hands. They've never seen this, Mira murmured, reading her device, and there was something close to awe in her tired voice. Look at the wake readings. They're confused. They keep increasing the bend, expecting the people to fold, and the people aren't folding, and the gods can't understand why, because it has always worked, on every world, for 2,000 years. They don't know about the lantern. The tally never wrote down a counter to the lantern, because the tally has never met one and lived to file it. We invented this. Humans invented this, 400 years ago, on a world a lot like yours, and the thing above your gods has no record of it. We're the one page missing from its count. She almost smiled. That's the whole secret, Star Tender. The tally keeps a record of everything it has ever pressed flat, and it has no record of us, because we are the thing that does not stay pressed. The 5 gods in the sky pressed harder. The pressure on Sael's skull doubled and tripled, and he fell to one knee on the terrace, and clutched the slate to his chest, and felt his own memory begin to slide. For one terrible instant, he could not remember why he was here. He could not remember the cistern, or Olun, or the word he had refused to erase. The bending was reaching into him, into the chronicler, the most dangerous witness of all, and it was beginning to smooth him flat. Sael, Mira's voice, sharp, close. Read it, out loud. Now, don't try to remember it. Read it off the slate. The slate remembers even when you can't. That's what it's for. And Sael understood, finally and completely, why a chronicler matters. Why a true record kept on clay matters more than the bravest memory in the world. A memory can be smoothed. A mind can be edited. But a mark pressed into clay by an honest hand does not forget, because it does not think, because it is not a witness that can be talked out of anything. It is just the truth, lying still, waiting to be read. Sael fought to keep his eyes open against the smoothing. He thought, distantly, that this was the cruelest weapon he had ever heard of, crueler than any unmaking. The gods were not trying to kill him. They were trying to make him into a person who had never seen anything, a calm and emptied and contented person who would walk home tonight and sleep well and remember nothing, and who would have been, in his own smoothed estimation, perfectly happy. That was the horror of it. The forgetting did not feel like an attack. It felt like peace. It felt like the kind hand of a god lifting a heavy true thing off your shoulders and telling you that you never had to carry it, and the only thing in the whole bending sky that stood against that lie was a slab of honest clay in a boy's arms, marked by a hand that had refused, an hour ago, to set the heavy thing down. He lifted the slate. He could not remember what it said. It did not matter. He read it anyway, aloud, in the high tongue, his voice cracking and then steadying, throwing the words up into the bending sky. At the third bell, the sky over Tesavaru bent inward from the wrong direction. The bend came from the shut gate. A ship came through. It was gray. It carried a lantern on its prow. It named itself the Steadfast Aurora. It spoke in the high tongue. It said the bending is not holy. It said the bending is the wake of an engine, and the engine belongs to creatures, and creatures can be answered. He said the word, answered. He read it straight off the clay, where his own honest hand had pressed it an hour ago, and as he said it into the churning sky, the yellow light of the aurora flared brighter still, and far below, in the plaza, 40,000 people heard the boy's voice carried down on the ship's light, and some of them, a few of them, then more of them, began to repeat it. Answered! The bending can be answered. The five gods stopped pressing. The silence of it was enormous. The pressure on Sael's skull vanished all at once, and he gasped, and the bells stopped ringing, and the dragged stars hung still in their slid-out places, and the whole open sky seemed to hold its breath. The Veshtaru had felt it. They had felt a true record, read aloud, off honest clay, repeated by a crowd, in a sky they had owned without challenge for longer than the temple had stood. They had felt the one thing the jar cannot survive. And then, all five at once, the gods turned their unshapable bodies toward the gray ship in the doorway, and bent the sky to break it. Sael saw the bending gather. He saw the air around the steadfast aurora begin to curve, the way it curved around the gods themselves, the eye-aching wrongness closing in on the small gray hull from every side at once, a fist of folded space the size of the heavens, clenching to crush the ship the way a hand crushes a moth. Now they find out, Mira Adair said quietly, beside him, and there was no fear in her voice at all, only a hard old certainty, the certainty of someone who has watched this exact moment happen above 40 other worlds and knows how it ends. Now the gods find out what the lantern is made of. The fist of bent space closed on the steadfast aurora, and the steadfast aurora did not bend. Sael had seen the bending fold mountains. He had read, in the old temple records, of a god in the Second Age who had taken a rebel city and curved the space around it until the city occupied no space at all, until it was simply gone, not destroyed, gone, folded out of the world, like a word erased from clay. That was what the five gods were doing now to the gray ship. They were not striking it. Striking was for lesser things. They were trying to fold it out of existence, to bend the air around the steadfast aurora, until there was no longer any room in the sky for it to be. And the steadfast aurora refused to leave the room. Sael did not have the science for what he saw. Mira tried, later, to give him words for it, and the words were strange and small, but he wrote them down anyway, because that was his purpose. She said the ship carried what the humans called a frame keel, a long spine of something they had spent 400 years learning to make, a metal that remembered its own shape so fiercely that no amount of bent space could persuade it to be a different shape, or to be no shape at all. She said the gods bent space, but the keel of the aurora bent space back, locally, in a tight stubborn bubble, exactly the size of the ship, so that inside the bubble the sky was simply honest, simply flat, simply true. She said it was not a shield. A shield blocks a thing. This did not block. This disagreed. The gods told the air around the ship to fold, and the ship's keel told the same air to stay, and the air, caught between a god and 400 years of human stubbornness, chose the ship. What Sael saw was simpler, and he wrote it simply. The fist of bent space closed on the gray ship, and the gray ship rang. It rang like the great bells of the temple, one vast, clean note that rolled out across the whole sky, and the bent space shattered off it, like ice off a struck bell, and the steadfast aurora hung exactly where it had hung, unmoved, unbent, its lantern burning. Sael saw the long, pale body of the nearest god recoil. He had not known a god could recoil. In 19 years of records, in 2,000 years of temple history, there was not one account of a Veshtaru flinching from anything. They flinched now. The bending had always worked. The bending had worked on every world, every city, every rebel, every star. It had never once met a thing that simply declined to be bent. And now it had, and the thing was a single scarred gray ship the size of a temple, and the god did not know what to do. Sael wrote it down as it happened, his stylus flying. The first Veshtaru struck the gray ship with the full bending, and the ship rang like a bell and did not move. He underlined the did not move 3 times, pressing so hard the stylus nearly went through the clay, because in 2,000 years of temple record, there was no such line, and he wanted whoever read it after him to feel the impossibility of it in the very pressure of the marks. And the bell note did something to the city. Sael heard it first as a change in the wailing of the crowd below. The pilgrims had been crying out in terror, the long, low wail of people watching their gods go to war. But when the gray ship rang and held, the wail broke. It cracked open into something else, something Sael had never heard 40,000 people make at once. A great ragged rising sound that took him a moment to name, because he had never had cause to name it before. It was a cheer. The people of Tesavaru, who had worshipped the bending all their lives, were cheering the thing that refused to bend. 2,000 years of fear came apart in that one sound, and Sael wrote it down. The people cheered. They had never cheered. There was no word in the high tongue for the cheer of a freed crowd, so I am making one. He made one. He pressed it into the clay. It is the first new word in the record in 2,000 years, and the gods made me write it by losing. So the gods did what every unchallengeable power does when the challenge finally comes. They stopped being subtle. The 5 gods abandoned the bending and reached, all together, for the brute weight of the sky itself. Sael felt the heavens lean. The 5 long pale bodies wove together into a single churning column, and the column drew down out of the shut gate, the raw stuff that the gods had always held back, the unmaking, the true unmaking, the force the priests only ever whispered about, the thing that did not fold a city out of the world but burned it out, scoured it out, left not even the absence of a thing. The column of it came down on the steadfast aurora like a falling sea. "Hold the lantern," Mira said into her device very quietly, almost a prayer. "Aurora, hold it." The steadfast aurora held it. The unmaking broke over the gray ship, and the gray ship took it, all of it, the whole weight of 5 gods, and the held-back fury of 2,000 years. And it did not fold, and it did not break, and it did not go dark. Sael watched the scarred flank of the battleship glow white, then orange, then a deep furious red, watched whole sections of its gray hide char and blister, and peel away into the churning sky, and through all of it, the painted lantern on the prow burned yellow, untouched, defiant, a single steady honest light, at the heart of a storm that was trying to erase the very idea of light. The ship was being hurt. Sael could see it being hurt. It was being hurt the way the old wounds down its flank had once hurt it, the way a thing is hurt that has been hurt many times, and lived through all of them, and it held. And then the steadfast aurora, having absorbed everything the gods could pour onto it, having let them empty 2,000 years of held-back fury into its scarred gray body, did the thing that no one on the world of Tesavaru, not Sael, not Olun, not the most ancient record in the deepest vault of the temple, had ever imagined a thing could do. It answered. The long row of dark hatches down the aurora's undamaged side, the doors Sael had understood from the first moment, were meant for things to come out, all opened at once, and out of them came light, but not the soft yellow lantern light. This was hard white light, fast white light, 240 lances of it. Sael counted them later off the slate, because counting was what kept him whole. 240 lances of hard white fire that crossed the churning sky in less than a heartbeat and struck the woven column of the gods. Sael had been taught that the gods could not be touched. That was the first article of the faith. The gods bent the sky. The sky did not touch the gods. Nothing reached them. Nothing could. They lived above all reaching. The 240 lances reached them. Sael counted the doors first, before he counted the lances. 40 doors, 20 to a side on the undamaged flank, each one opening in the same instant, with a precision that struck him as its own kind of message. The Veshtaru came in 5s, ragged and vast and unshapable, claiming to be beyond all counting. The gray ship answered in exact even numbers. 40 doors, 240 lances, every figure clean and countable and true. and Sael understood that this too was part of the war. The gods fought with the uncountable, the thing too large and strange to be written down. The humans fought with the counted, the precise, the recorded. Every lance had a number. Every door had a place. The whole ship was a true record made of metal, and it was firing the truth at things that had spent 2,000 years insisting the truth could not touch them. The first god came apart. Sael saw it. He saw the long, pale, unshapeable body, the body whose shape his eye had refused to hold, struck by 40 lances at once, and he saw it lose its argument with the air. That was how Mira described it afterward, and Sael wrote it down exactly, because it was the truest thing anyone said that whole long night. The god lost its argument with the air, the thing that let a Veshtaru bend space, that let it slide between the stars and pull reality through itself like thread, depended on the air agreeing to be bent, and the human lances did not burn the god, or fold it, or unmake it. They did something far simpler, and far more terrible. They made the air around the god honest. They struck it with 240 small, fierce bubbles of the same stubborn truth the ship's keel carried, and inside those bubbles, the sky was flat. And a god that cannot bend the sky is a god that cannot exist, because bending is the only place it lives. The first god lost its argument with the air, and the air closed over the place where it had been, flat and honest and empty, and the god was gone. Not folded, not hidden. Gone. The way a lie is gone when a true record is read aloud beside it. The 4 remaining gods broke and ran. Sael would never forget the moment. The drums had called it the coming beat, the beat of the gods descending in glory, and now the same gods were climbing, fleeing, hauling their long, pale bodies back up through the open shut gate, as fast as the bending could carry them, and the bending was failing them, stuttering, because 40,000 people were standing in the plaza below, shouting a true record up into the sky, and a true record is the one weather a god cannot fly through. The 4 gods clawed for the opening. The steadfast Aurora, burning and scarred and unbeaten, turned its lantern prow to follow them, and fired again, 80 more lances, and the second god lost its argument, with the air halfway to the gate, and was simply, flatly, no longer there. Sael wrote the count as it happened, because the count was the record, and the record was the war. 5 gods came down. The Aurora answered. 1 god lost its argument with the air over the plaza. A second lost it halfway to the gate. 3 remained, and the 3 were running, and the running was itself a thing no record had ever held, and Sael pressed it into the clay with a hand that had stopped being afraid. 3 of the 5 gods of Tesavaru fled the sky they had owned for 2,000 years. I watched them run. The whole city watched them run. Let it be written that the unchallengeable can be made to run, and that the running was witnessed, and that the witnesses did not look away. He understood, writing it, that this was the true weapon, more than the keel and more than the lances. The lances broke 2 gods, but the running broke all 5, and it broke them in the only place that finally mattered, which was inside the heads of 40,000 watching people. A god that dies in secret is replaced by another god. A god that runs in front of its own worshippers is finished forever, because the worship dies with the watching, and worship is the only thing a god is really made of. The Aurora had not come to kill the Veshtaru. It had come to be seen beating them, in the open, in the light, by the people who had been told all their lives that such a thing could not be seen, because it could not happen. And now it had happened, and now it was seen, and now it was written, and the writing meant it could never be unhappened again. 3 gods reached the shut gate. 3 gods poured themselves back through it, back into the sealed forbidden dark from which they had ruled this sky without challenge for 2,000 years, and behind them, the opening began to close, the peeled sky knitting shut, the dragged stars sliding back toward their proper places. And the steadfast Aurora let them go. Sael did not understand it. The ship had broken 2 gods. The ship was clearly able to break 3 more. The fleeing gods were right there, climbing slow and desperate up a failing bend, and the gray ship had only to fire once more. But it did not fire. It hung in the doorway of the closing gate, its lantern burning, its scarred flank cooling from red to orange to a deep wounded gray, and it watched the last 3 gods flee, and it let them. Why? Sael said. His voice came out raw. He had been shouting the record for so long he had not noticed. Why is it letting them go? It can finish them. Why won't it finish them? Mira Adair watched the closing gate with that same tired old certainty in her face. When she answered slowly, and Sael wrote down every word. Because we didn't come here to kill 3 gods, she said. We came here to end a lie. And the lie doesn't end when the gods die. The lie ends when the people who were inside it watch the gods run. She gestured down at the plaza, at the 40,000 upturned faces, at the man who had pointed, at the crowd that had repeated the word, at the slow, tremendous thing that was happening to them all, as they watched the unchallengeable run away. If the Aurora chased those 3 down and burned them in front of everyone, the people would just trade one master for another. They'd go home tonight worshipping the gray ship instead of the gods. We don't want to be worshipped, Startender. We have a whole long history of finding out where that road goes. We want something much harder than worship. She looked at him. We want the people to walk home tonight, knowing the gods can run. Because a god that can run is a god that can be questioned. And a god that can be questioned is not a god at all. It's just a thing in the sky. And a thing in the sky can be answered. The shut gate closed. The last sliver of forbidden light pinched out. The stars slid home into their old fixed places. The wrong color glow drained out of the eastern heaven. And the sky over Tessavaru was, for the first time in 2,000 years, simply the sky. Not bent, not owned, not holy. Just a great dark honest dome of ordinary stars, hanging over a city that had, for one night, refused to forget what it saw. Below in the plaza, 40,000 people stood in absolute silence. And then, from somewhere in the middle of them, a single voice began to read the record back. The whole record. The third bell, the wrong direction bend, the gray ship, the lantern, the word. Sael recognized the voice, even from up here, even cracked and exhausted and human. It was one of the freed choir wardens, one of the 6 Mira had unleashed in the cistern, standing in the plaza with his own voice in his own mouth for the first time in years, reading aloud the true record of the night the gods ran, so that no bending, ever again, could smooth it flat. And one by one, the people began to read it with him. The reading went on for an hour. Sael stood on the high terrace and listened to 40,000 people read the true record of the night, up into a sky that no longer bent, and he understood, slowly, that he was listening to a thing being born. Not a war won, not a god killed, something quieter and far larger. A whole world learning, all at once, in a single night, that it was allowed to remember. He found Olun on the terrace stair. The old martial priest was sitting against the cold stone wall where the choir wardens had left him, and for one terrible moment Sael thought he was dead, but then the old eyes opened, and the old face cracked into the slow grand smile that had wasted the time of so many important people over 200 years. You did not erase it, Olun said. I did not erase it, Sael said, and knelt, and took the old priest's hand. I heard you read it. Olun's voice was thin but steady. I heard the whole city read it. Do you know, boy, in 200 years of keeping the record, I never once heard a record read aloud by anyone but a priest in an empty vault. It is not meant to be read aloud. The gods do not like it. That is rather the point of a record under the gods. You write it true, and you lock it in the dark, and you never let it be heard, so that the truth exists but does no harm. He laughed, a dry, careful laugh. And tonight, 40,000 people read it in the open air. And the gods ran. I am 200 years old, and I have just learned what a record is for. It is for reading aloud. It was always for reading aloud. We only ever locked it away because they taught us to be afraid of our own voices. The choir wardens did not come back for Sael. By the time the reading ended, there was no one left to send them. The temple, Sael learned over the following days, had simply come apart, not in fire or fighting, but in something stranger and gentler. The priests came down from their high cells and walked out into the plaza, and stood among the pilgrims and listened to the record being read, and one by one they took off the burning circlets of the choir wardens, the leashes, and set them down on the stone, and the cold blue fire went out of them, and the people inside them woke up. By the third day, there were 904 circlets stacked in a great cold pile at the foot of the temple stair, and 904 people walking the city with their own voices in their own mouths, frightened and angry, and slowly, carefully, glad, exactly as Mira Adair had said they would be. The freed warden from the cistern came to find Sael on the second day. Sael did not recognize him at first, because the last time he had seen the man had been a flat layered voice, and a burning blue circlet, and a body the gods were wearing like a glove. Now he was only a person, tall and tired and unsteady on his feet, with a long pale scar on his temple where the circlet had sat for 9 years. He climbed the terrace stair slowly, and stood before Sael, and did not seem to know what to do with his own hands. "I came up to the terrace to take you," the man said. His voice was rough, unused to being his own. "On the first night, the gods sent me up the stair behind the others, and another of me went down to the cistern to wait, and I stood here on this terrace, and I heard you read the record aloud, and I could not stop you, because I had no voice of my own to stop you with. I had not had one in 9 years. Do you understand what it is, boy, to stand inside your own body and watch your mouth say words that someone else has chosen? To feel your hand lift, to make the sign against unmaking, when your heart is screaming that the ship is real, that the boy is right, that the record is true." He shook his head slowly. "I heard you say the word, answered, and inside, where the gods could not reach, where they never bothered to reach because they did not think anything was left in there, I said it with you. I have wanted to say it aloud for 2 days. Answered. There, I have said it with my own mouth. I wanted you to be the one who heard me say it first." Sael took the man's unsteady hand and held it, and he did not let go for a long time. And afterward he wrote the whole exchange into the record, every word, because it was true, and because the man had waited 9 years to be true, and the least a chronicler could do was make sure it stayed that way. Mira came to find Sael on the morning of the 3rd day. He was on the terrace, where he had spent most of 3 days writing. The slate was long full. He had moved on to proper record scrolls now, the good ones, the temple's best clay, and he had filled 11 of them, and he had no intention of stopping. She climbed the stair and stood beside him at the rail and looked out over the city, which was loud now, loud in a way Sael had never heard, the loudness of 40,000 people, all talking at once about a thing they were no longer afraid to say. "We're leaving tonight," she said. Sael had known it was coming. He had still hoped it was not. "The ship is hurt," he said. "I saw it. Whole sections of it burned away. How can it leave?" "It's been hurt worse," Mira said, and there was an odd fondness in her voice, the way a person speaks of an old animal that has carried them through too many winters. "Those scars down its flank you saw the first night, the old ones, the healed ones. 40 other worlds, Star Tender, 40 other skies with 40 other things in them that had never been challenged until the Aurora put a lantern in their doorway. The ship limps home, and they patch it, and they send it out again, because there is always one more sky, with one more thing in it, that has convinced the people underneath that it cannot be answered." She looked at him. "It heals. It always heals. That's the other half of the name, the half we don't paint on the prow. Steadfast. It means the lantern goes out, world after world, into the worst dark there is, and the lantern comes home, world after world, and it does not stop, and it does not break, and it does not let itself believe that any sky is too high to answer. There are crews that have died on the Aurora. There are no crews that have lost on it. That's not a boast, Star Tender. It's a job. We just do the job." "Take me with you," Sael said. He had not planned to say it. It came out of him whole, the way the refusal to erase the record had come out of him on the first night, and the moment he said it, he knew it was the truest thing he had ever wanted. Mira Adair was quiet for a long moment. Then she shook her head, and it was the kindest no Sael had ever been given. "No," she said, "and I'll tell you why, and you'll write it down, because it's the most important thing I'm going to say to you. The Aurora doesn't take people away from the worlds it lights. That's the whole rule. The one rule we never break." She turned and faced him fully. "We free a world by finding the one person who already refused to lie, and standing behind them while they finish the sentence. And then we leave. Because if we take that person away, if we carry off the bravest record keeper on every world we touch, then we're no better than the thing that built your gods. We'd be collecting you, keeping you. And the world we lit would be dark again in a generation, because the one who would not lie would be gone, flying around the stars with us, instead of home, where they're needed, teaching the next one." She put her gloved hand on his shoulder. "Your sky is free, Star Tender. But a free sky is the easy part. The hard part is the next 200 years, when the fear comes creeping back, when someone tells the children the gods will return if they remember too loudly, when the record gets locked away in a vault again because it's safer there. That's the war that never ends. And it's not a war the Aurora can fight for you. It's yours. And it needs the one who would not erase the record, standing right here, on this terrace, where 40,000 people learn to read aloud. Not out there with us. Here. Sael looked out over his loud, frightened, glad, free city. He thought of Olin, who had learned at 200 what a record was for. He thought of the 904 people with their voices back. He thought of the children who would be told, someday, that the gods might return. Then I'll stay, he said, and I'll teach the next one. I know you will, said Mira Adair. That's why the ship spoke to you, and not the priests. Before the ship left, Mira gave Sael one thing. She took it from a pocket of her dark suit, a small, flat disc of gray metal, no larger than a counting token, and she pressed it into his hand, the way Olin had pressed the iron seal ring into it on the first night. It was warm. It hummed, very faintly, against his palm. This is a piece of the keel, she said. A small one. The frame keel, the thing that would not bend. When you hold it, the space around your hand stays honest, just a little, just enough. It is not a weapon, and it cannot save your life, but here is what it can do, and it is the only thing that matters. She closed his fingers over it. 200 years from now, or 500, when the fear has crept back, when someone stands in this plaza and tells the children that the gods are returning, that the sky is bending again, that they felt it and saw it and the people must kneel, you take this out, and you hold it up, and the space around it will not bend, and everyone will see that the sky is honest, that there is no God in it, that the bending was a lie. It is a piece of the truth you can hold in your hand. We leave one on every world we light, not so the people will worship it, so that when the lie comes back, and it always comes back, there will be one small, stubborn, honest thing they can hold up against it and say, no, not this time. We remember. We have it written down, and the sky did not bend. Sael closed his hand around the warm gray disk. He understood that he was being given the last and smallest piece of the lantern, the part that could stay behind, the part that did not have to fly away into the next dark. He would keep it on a cord around his neck for the rest of his life, and he would pass it to the girl with the clear, stubborn eyes, and she would pass it on, and the keel piece would outlive them all, humming its small, honest hum against the heart of one record keeper after another, world without end. They left that night. The whole city came out to watch. Sael stood on the high terrace with Olun beside him, in a chair the freed wardens had carried up, and they watched the steadfast aurora rise out of the air over the plaza, scarred and patched and burning its single yellow lantern, and turn its blunt gray prow back toward the east, toward the shut gate, which was no longer shut, which was just a band of ordinary stars now, a part of the sky like any other, named and known and unafraid. The ship spoke once more before it left, the same flat, hard voice in the same badly learned high tongue, carried down on the same yellow light, heard by every soul in the city. People of the world you call Tessavaru, we are leaving now. We will not come back. You will not need us to. Remember 3 things, and we will be content. Remember that the bending was the wake of an engine, and not the act of gods. Remember that a thing in your sky can always be answered, no matter how high it hangs, or how long it has hung there unchallenged. And remember the one among you, who would not erase the record on the night the gods ran. His name is in the record. Read it aloud, sometimes. That is all we ask. Goodbye. And then the steadfast aurora climbed, cleanly, honestly, the air closing true behind it, no bend, no ache, no wrongness, and it crossed the sky and reached the band of ordinary stars where the shut gate had been, and it slid in among them, and its yellow lantern grew smaller and smaller, until it was only one more light in the dark, indistinguishable from a star, and then it was gone. The city stood in silence, and then, somewhere in the plaza, a single voice began to read the record back from the beginning, and the whole city joined it, and Sael of the Star Tenders, 19 years old, keeper of the true record of the night the gods ran, stood on the high terrace beside the oldest priest in the world, and read it with them. In the weeks that followed, Sael learned the size of what the gray ship had left behind. The temple did not fall in fire, it fell in conversation. That was the strangest thing, and the thing Sael spent the most clay describing, because no record in the world had a precedent for it. A power that had stood unchallenged for 2,000 years, that had owned a sky, and leashed 900 voices, and pressed a whole world flat, came apart not in war, but in talk. In the simple, endless talk of 40,000 people who had finally been allowed to say aloud the thing they had all secretly seen. The pilgrims did not go home. They stayed in the plaza, and they talked, day and night. And the talk was a kind of slow tide that wore the old certainties down to nothing. Sael moved among them with his scrolls, and wrote down what they said, and what they said, over and over, in 100 different voices, came to the same thing. We saw it. We were not mad. The sky bent the wrong way, and a gray ship came through, and the gods ran. We saw it. It is true. And once a thing is true, and said aloud by 40,000 people, no priest in the world can put it back in the vault. The choir wardens were the hardest. 904 people woke up over the following days. Each one of them dug out of years inside their own bodies. Each one of them frightened and ashamed and grieving the time they had lost. Some of them could not bear it. Some of them walked out of the city and were not seen again. But most of them stayed, and most of them, in time, did the thing Mira Adair had promised they would do, the hardest and bravest thing, which was to stand in the plaza and tell the people exactly what they had done while the gods were wearing them, the blasphemies they had reported, the neighbors they had named, the records they had been sent to erase. They confessed it all, in their own voices, and the people listened, and the people forgave them, because the people understood at last that a glove cannot be blamed for the hand inside it. Sael wrote down every confession. It took him a year. He counted them when he was done. 904. Every one of them named, every one of them true, every one of them free. He kept the record for the rest of his life. He lived a long time, longer than he expected, long enough to see the temple emptied of its vaults, and the records carried out into the light, and read aloud in every square in every city, until reading the record aloud was simply the thing the people did, the way other worlds prayed, except that it was not prayer, because there was no God in it, only the truth, and the voices, and the refusal to forget. He saw the burning circlets melted down and made into bells, ordinary bells, bells anyone could ring, and the bells were rung on the anniversary of the night the gods ran, and the children were told the true story, the whole true story, the third bell, and the wrong direction bend, and the gray ship, and the lantern, and the word, so that the fear that Mira Adair had warned him about, the fear that came creeping back, found a world that was very hard to make afraid. He taught the next one. Of course he did. A girl, in the end, a chronicler's daughter who had her mother's clear eyes, and her own stubborn refusal to write a thing that did not happen, or unwrite a thing that did, and Sael, old now, older than Olun had been, told her the one thing that mattered, the thing the gray ship had taught him without ever quite saying it. They will tell you, he said, that some things in the sky cannot be answered, that some powers are too high, too old, too vast, that they have hung there unchallenged for so long that the not challenging has become a law of the world, and you will be tempted to believe it, because it is easier, and because the believing is built into everything around you, into the temple, and the language, and the very shape of your fear. He took her small hand and pressed it flat on a fresh slate, the way Olun had once steadied his. But it is not true. It was never true. A gray ship came through a sky that everyone said was sealed, and it hung above a power that everyone said could not be challenged, and it put a lantern in the doorway, and it would not bend, and the unchallengeable thing turned and ran. I was there. I wrote it down. It is the truest thing I know, and I am giving it to you now, so that you can give it to the one after you. Nothing in the sky is too high to answer. Keep the record true, and when they come for you, do not erase it. Run, if you must, but take it with you, and read it aloud. The girl looked up at him with her clear, stubborn eyes, and she did not look frightened at all, and Sael knew the record would be safe. He died in his sleep, very old, on the anniversary night, while down in the plaza, 40,000 voices were reading the record up into a free and ordinary sky. They buried him on the high terrace, where the gray ship had spoken to a frightened boy with a slate, and on his marker, they carved no title and no rank, only the one line he had asked for, the line that was true, the only thing a chronicler ever finally wants written down. He did not erase it. And far away, across the dark, on a sky no one on Tesavaru would ever see, the steadfast aurora came limping out of another opened gate, scarred and patched and burning its single yellow lantern, above another unchallengeable power that had ruled its world without question for longer than its people could remember. And a contact officer, in a dark, close-fitting suit, went down into the dark to find the one person on that world who was already keeping the record true. There is always one. That is the thing the unchallengeable powers never understand. World after world, sky after sky. They build the jar perfectly. They put the lid on tight. They teach the fear into the language, and the temple, and the shape of the stars. And still, somewhere underneath, in the dark, there is always one small, stubborn soul with a slate and an honest hand, writing down the true shape of the jar, refusing to erase it, waiting, without knowing they are waiting for a gray ship to come through the sealed sky, and hang a lantern in the doorway, and say the one word that brings the whole thing down. Answered. It can always be answered. The lantern came home, and healed, and went out again, into the next dark, and the next, and it did not stop, because somewhere there was always one more sky with one more thing in it that the people underneath had been told could never be challenged. And it was wrong. It was always wrong. The gray ship made very sure of that.